The US is quietly rewiring its power projection in space and at sea, and the private sector is right in the middle of it. Vandenberg may get a West Coast super heavy pad. A maritime autonomy startup just bought a major US boat builder to power the Golden Fleet. NASA is weighing an early return of ISS crew over a medical issue, and Eric Schmidt is backing a private space telescope that aims to out-collect Hubble. So let's get into it. First up, the US Space Force wants to turn Vandenberg into a true heavy and super heavy launch hub. Space Launch Delta 30 has issued an RFI to release and develop Space Launch Complex 14 as a commercially financed pad for vehicles that can throw 20 to 50 metric tons and more into low Earth orbit. Right now, Vandenberg handles medium and some heavy lift, but there's no dedicated infrastructure for the class of rockets that can lift really big payloads or deploy large constellations in a single shot. If SLC-14 actually gets built, it becomes the first dedicated super heavy complex on the US West Coast, optimized for polar and sun-synchronous orbits. The orbits you want for missile warning, ISR, and Earth observation with consistent lighting conditions. The twist is the business model. The RFI explicitly says qualified providers will finance, design, build, operate, and maintain the complex themselves in exchange for a fair market value lease. So Space Force gets resilience and capability without owning the concrete, and industry gets a strategically located pad with government demand baked in, plus commercial polar and SSO customers on top. Big picture, this is about the race to resilience doctrine. More launch sites, more providers, more lift, so you can reconstitute constellations quickly after an attack or a failure, instead of waiting in line for a single coastal choke point. And it sharpens the question, which players are actually ready to step in with heavy or super heavy vertical launch on the West Coast? And how does this change the economics for companies already flying from Vandenberg versus newcomers who might want to plant a flag there? Story 2 takes us from orbit to the waterline. Magnet Defense, a fully autonomous maritime systems company, has acquired Metal Shark, one of the more prolific US builders of aluminum patrol boats and high-speed craft. Magnet is a Miami and Florida-based autonomy startup focused on AI-enabled unmanned surface vessels for fleet operations and missile defense missions. Metal Shark brings established shipyards, workforce, and a track record of more than 2,000 vessels delivered. The combined company is positioning itself as a leading supplier of AI-enabled USVs to the US and allied militaries, with Metal Shark's yards serving as production hubs. Crucially, those yards are described as the hubs from which Magnet will deliver key capabilities for the US Golden Fleet initiative, a naval program launched under President Trump to field a new class of heavily armed surface vessels. Magnet is framing this acquisition as the pivot from prototype to industrial rate production, pairing a software-defined autonomy stack and modular vessel design with domestic industrial scale fabrication. The through line is clear. In the same way Space Force wants more launch capacity on tap, the Navy and broader national security community want a pipeline of attritable, autonomous, and upgradable surface platforms that they can buy and field at scale. This raises some big questions. How does a Golden Fleet, built on autonomous or optionally manned craft, change naval tactics, logistics, and missile defense? And what does it do to the balance between traditional shipyards and software-first defense startups? Back in orbit, NASA is dealing with a reminder that human spaceflight is still fragile. An astronaut on the International Space Station has a medical issue serious enough that NASA postponed the planned spacewalk and is openly discussing the possibility of ending the Crew 11 mission early. The agency has not named the astronaut or shared medical details, citing privacy, but reportedly emphasizes that the crew member is in stable condition. Crew 11 launched to the ISS in August 2025 and was slated to stay until around May, so an early return now would truncate the back half of the mission and ripple through planned spacewalks and research timelines. NASA officials are using fairly strong language. Quote, "Safely conducting our missions is our highest priority, and we are actively evaluating all options, including the possibility of an earlier end to Crew 11's mission. This is the exact scenario agencies train for, but rarely have to execute, balancing the medical needs of one astronaut, the risk profile of staying on orbit, and the operational value of keeping the full crew aboard. For the commercial station future, this is an early test case. What level of onboard medical capabilities is expected? Who bears the cost and risk of early return? And how do private operators design redundancy so one medical issue doesn't derail critical on-orbit work? Our last story looks further out at astrophysics. Former Google CEO Eric Schmidt is backing a set of 4 next-gen telescopes, including a privately funded space observatory called Lazuli. Lazuli is designed to have about 70% more collecting area than Hubble, with a 3-meter primary mirror, and would carry a wide field imager, an integral field spectrograph, and a high contrast chronograph. Timelines hold, Lazuli would launch as soon as 2029, making it a privately funded space telescope with capabilities that start to encroach on what used to be exclusively NASA and ESA territory. The project is being led by Schmidt Sciences and Partners, with 3 ground-based arrays also in the portfolio. The Lazuli is the piece that really tests how far private capital is willing to go into flagship-class space science. It opens up several fault lines. Who sets observation priorities when a private entity controls a high-end observatory? How data rights are handled between the sponsor, the scientific community, and governments? And what happens if a platform with that kind of performance is pointed at Earth or used for dual-use sensing? In a world where the US is leading on commercial launch, commercial satellites, and even commercial servicing of aging observatories, Lazuli looks like the next logical step in privatizing the space science stack. Taken together, these 4 stories show the same pattern. The US is distributing risk across more platforms, more sites, and more private actors. Whether that's super heavy launch from Vandenberg, autonomous Golden Fleet vessels, contingency planning on the ISS, or privately bankrolled space telescopes. The question for policymakers and investors now is less, will this happen, and more, who controls the key nodes, who captures the upside, and how resilient are these systems when the environment gets contested?